Welcome back to the Genesis of Conception. I am your hostess, Rebecca David, and this is the space between the picket lines. Here we talk about all things pro-life, but we keep strictly to the facts and the science and that which is provable. Now, in our last video, we covered the my body, my choice, or as some like to call it, the bodily autonomy argument, and we discussed why it doesn't really make much sense at all once you get past the baseline service level. This week, we're going to take a look at the miscarriage side of things and why it matters so much. Thank you in advance for being willing to go on this journey with me. First off, if you're watching this and you have had a miscarriage, my most sincere condolences. What you've been through is a tragedy, and my heart goes out to you. And I will actually be providing resources specifically for you at the end of this video. So, to really dip our toes into this faction of the pro-life fight, we need to start by knowing the actual definition of a miscarriage. According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a miscarriage is defined as the spontaneous expulsion of a human fetus before it is viable, and especially between the 12th and the 28th weeks of gestation. Now, interesting fact for you here, the original printed version of this dictionary, which has the same wording as the one you can find online, it came out in 1981. That was decades before we had the medical technology which we currently have that allows for a child's survival outside of the womb before the 28-week mark. Another pivotal notation here is the difference between a miscarriage and a stillbirth. A stillbirth is defined as the birth of a dead child. Here's what that means. It is considered a miscarriage if the child could not have survived with help once born. It is a stillbirth if the child could have survived but is simply born dead due to a whole variety of reasons. Now, this distinction is important within the viability argument, which is frequently used by the pro-choice world, because that viability is a goalpost that is always moving. In fact, by way of the most recent update on viability outside of the womb, we have a report from Live Action, which tells us that this month, which at the time of recording is February 2022, a half-pound micro-preemie from Maryland named Heaven. She has survived being born at 23 weeks of gestation, and she's actually going to be going home soon, but she does not hold the record for the youngest ever. That honor goes to Jamarius Jachin Arbor Jr. He was born at just 21 weeks gestation back in December 2019. You know, I never fail to be awed by both the medical advancements and the sheer human will to survive, which make both Heaven's and Jermaeus' lives possible. Now keep in mind that they were both born almost 2 full months earlier than the original 28-week mark that Merriam-Webster uses. Now, with a firm understanding of what miscarriage is being said upon, the definition, on to combating the thought that this could never happen to you. Well, unless you're a guy. First, there is an entire calculator website available to you if you desire to take a look. It can be found at datayze.com, and there is a link available in the info tab. It calculates miscarriage and the rates thereof. Second, according to the mayoclinic.org, about 10 to 20% of known pregnancies end in a miscarriage. Interestingly, they actually have a separate definition for miscarriage, which is the spontaneous loss of the pregnancy before the 20th week. They go on to say that most miscarriages happen because the child is not developing as expected. Now, this is important because each week in the womb is there due to the child developing or growing in some way. I have a whole other video on that. It is called The Stages of Fetal Development. You should see it somewhere on the screen, and it goes into all that. Now, if those growth phases are not hit, then it is extremely detrimental to the child. So it can cause a miscarriage. Then there's the issue of the raised probability of a miscarriage after having an abortion. Now, there are two kinds of abortion, surgical and medical. I actually go in depth on all of that stuff and the after effects thereof in another video. It's called What Abortions Do. You should see that somewhere. Now, according to verywellfamily.com, if you opt for a surgical abortion, then you run the risk of infection, hemorrhage, and uterine damage, all of which can run the serious risk of inhibiting your body's ability to safely carry a pregnancy to term further down the road. Now, alternatively, if you opt for a medical abortion, that's the one where you take the pills, you run the very real risk of finding yourself in need of medical attention and/or intervention, and that comes with the same set of risks as the surgical kind. Either way, it is the real and terrible truth that choosing an abortion could be not only the death sentence for the child you're currently carrying, but also for the children that you want to have in the future. Now, I'm actually friends with two separate women who chose abortion in their earlier years, and they are now unable to conceive. I can attest to the devastation that I've witnessed it just wreak havoc on their lives. Now, I can give you all the statistics and all the and all the facts and all that good jazz, but in cases like this, a personal story tends to work best to get the point across. So here is one that is near and dear to my own heart. Now, this particular individual could not be here in person, so I had her record separately and send it my way.
Alrighty. Hello, everybody. My name is Rachel Buster, sister of Rebecca David. I am the eldest of the clan. She's the producer, content editor, mastermind behind the Genesis of Conception series that you're watching currently. I'm this week's interviewee, and my topic is going to be miscarriage. It's a very typically undiscussed topic, as I've discovered with my experiences so far. So I have a list of questions she's given me to answer, so I will be sharing my responses to these questions. I will probably be looking down at the question list at some point or another through the video. So we'll get started. The question to discuss first is what being an expected mother is like, especially with two born children. I do have two children, they're both under 2 years old. That's typically considered very close together. That's how we wanted it. My husband and I wanted to have kids that were very close together, so they would ideally be close in age, and more so that we didn't have to be in the baby stage and then out of the baby stage and then inside of it again. It can be a bit of a stressful period of time, so when you're accustomed to it, it's easier to handle it. It just becomes normal life. So because of that, we wanted to have however many kids God was to bless us with in a short period of time, as He allows. I am also a Christian, and I've been pro-life my entire life, for as much of it as I have memory. We were very much all raised in the same pro-life Christian household, with the expectation and the mutual passion for sharing the pro-life values and generally encouraging a value in our community for valuing unborn life at all stages, from infant or from unborn all the way until you die at the very end of your life. That God's got a plan and a purpose for each stage, and that He orchestrates from the very start. So, with the expectation or the desire to have kids close together, it was not a scary thing for us when we found out we were expecting the third kid. My husband having just gone with entrepreneurship, we had a lot of people voice concern for whether it was the right time to be pregnant with another child, whether we should even have another child. We didn't meet it with much focus. It wasn't something that we were concerned about. We knew that if God enabled the life to be conceived, He had a plan for it and He would provide. So we just went about our life. I found out in October of last year that I was expecting, or was it October? It was a little bit later than the other two kids had both been conceived. So I found out that we were expecting a child, and I was very excited to tell all the family. I got the first ultrasound the Monday of Thanksgiving week, so I was really eager to break the news to all the family that weekend at the various family dinners and show them the picture of the little baby. At this point, the baby was nothing more than a dot on a screen. No heartbeat, no movement. The no heartbeat portion was a bit unexpected. The OBGYN did not voice any concern. We figured I was just a lot earlier on than I initially had thought that I was. So instead of being 6 weeks, or 8 or 10 weeks, she presumed I was more like 5 or 6 weeks, wherein you wouldn't necessarily have a heartbeat quite yet. So we scheduled the next appointment, and it was scheduled for right after the Christmas and New Year's celebrations. So we told everybody. I've always been a very open person, and I was very eager to share the joy of this third child. Which brings me to the third question. The second and third question, I kind of jumped around because I have read these questions before. When I'm supposed to explain the emotions on finding out I'm pregnant. We had just been through some sickness with my husband, and I was afraid that I was just getting the sickness as the next person in the household. I had some upset stomach, nausea, so on. About a week before, a friend of mine convinced me to take a pregnancy test, and so I took one at about midnight, and it was positive. It was very faint positive. I took it earlier in the evening. I actually forgot about it because I wasn't expecting it to be positive. And I was on the phone with my friend, and somewhere near midnight I remembered I had taken the test. So with her on FaceTime, I went and I took it, and I was surprised when I saw that there were 2 lines, one very faint, the other very bold. So I remember being very excited and shocked, and I went into my husband, who was sleeping, and I woke him up. I was like, honey, it's positive. He's like, are you pregnant? Yeah, okay. And then he goes back to sleep. Since we're in the baby making stage, and his mind is just the next thing, and it's expected, you have sex, you make babies, that's how that works. So he woke up, went to work the next day, verified the next morning that I was in fact, had told him I had a positive pregnancy test. I scheduled the OBGYN appointment. Life went on as we had 2 prior pregnancies before that. So now on to the third question. How I found out I was miscarrying and my emotions associated. New Year's rolled around, and we'd by this time told most everybody. I'd made the Facebook announcement, and we were just coming home from the New Year's celebration. We went to one of my aunt's houses and had normal New Year's festivities. I, of course, avoided alcohol, all of that fun stuff. I noticed a little bit of spotting a few days before New Year's, and I was a bit concerned, but I also knew it was fairly normal in early pregnancy to have some spotting. Not red spotting, just like brown spotting, fairly typical. So I didn't think a lot of it. I didn't have any other symptoms, no pain. I didn't have anything else that would indicate something was going wrong. So on January 1st, at about midnight, I went to get ready for bed, and I noticed that I was bleeding a bit. And I knew from having lots of other friends get pregnant and unfortunately miscarry that it's a very common symptom, and it's very common in early pregnancy for that to be the point when you miscarry, and the common sign associated is bleeding. And it was enough blood that it had me concerned, so I again woke the husband up, and told them that I needed to take myself to the emergency room because the kids were sleeping, and I used to wake them up, drag them to a waiting room for how many hours. So I took myself to the emergency room. I checked in, I told them what the situation was, and they looked at me and they basically said, well, if you are miscarrying, there's nothing we can do about it. I need you to sign this form stating that you understand that we don't have any control over whether the miscarriage continues. So at the end of that, they didn't really tell me much about the ultrasound they took. They didn't tell me whether there was a heartbeat. They told me that there was still a little gestational sac present, but nothing else, and they were labeling it a threatened miscarriage. They told me to be careful, avoid lifting a lot of stuff, typical precautions and restrictions in early pregnancy when you have 2 kids and you have life to do. So I went home. The next morning happened to be my next OBGYN appointment, where I would expectedly see this hopefully much larger little baby rolling around, hopefully your heartbeat. So the next day at about midday, 11 or 12 was the appointment time. I took the kids to the OBGYN, and I told the OBGYN about the ER visit, and she did not seem surprised. She was very compassionate, very sympathetic, but it seemed like she was kind of expecting it. And sure enough, when we did the ultrasound, there was no little home on the screen. As you can tell, that's not something that you really ever forget. For those of you who have been through it, it will still bring up emotion, and everyone processes those differently. But it's an important thing to talk about and to share, because it happens often, and you never quite forget that emotion when you find out that you've miscarried, when it's official, and you know that it's not a lie, and it's not something that you dreamed, but it's actually real. So I looked up at the screen. I saw there was no baby home. I was expecting to see a much larger little infant bouncing around, waving, a very good heartbeat, and to be told that the prior night was not a concern, that everything was fine. And that's not what I was told, and it's not what I saw. So emotionally, I guess you can see what the emotion is. Physically, I hadn't yet experienced any pain. I hadn't yet begun any real bleeding. I had both of my kids with me, and my almost 2-year-old, my daughter. She knew from the prior visit that she was supposed to see something on the screen as well. So she looked up, and she looked at me, and she looked at the OBGYN, who was extremely compassionate and sympathetic. And I remember having no control over the emotion and the tears that just flowed. I didn't quite feel much of anything except shock and surprise and confusion. And my little girl kind of shuffled over to me, and she gave me a hug, and she just starts crying. And my little boy wasn't quite sure. He was still in his car seat, in the stroller. He was a little fussy because he was probably hungry, and I wasn't happy like I normally am. So the OBGYN expressed her sympathies in a very gentle way, handed me some tissues, and I was crying so intently that I couldn't speak or catch a breath. The tears were just kind of streaming, much more than they are currently. And I sat in confusion, and my first question was, why do I have to go through this? I remember before with my other pregnancies. I always hoped God would never have me go through a miscarriage because I never knew how I would handle it. I didn't want to handle one. It wasn't an experience that I wanted to be sympathetic towards. And here I was, looking at the ultrasound screen, and my little third baby wasn't there anymore. And I never quite audibly asked God why. I never voiced it. It was always in my head. I didn't have any negative association to him. I was just confused and sad and very disappointed, like I had done something wrong, like if I hadn't drank the coffee that I had, or if I ate more vegetables, or if I was consistent with taking prenatals, like somehow I could have stopped it. And I was assured by the OBGYN that wasn't the case, that I didn't do anything wrong. So she gave me time to process, gain a little bit more composure, and I just tugged my daughter, and I went and kissed my son, and I was overwhelmed with gratitude, ironically, in the middle of all the pain, that I had two beautiful children that were sitting there, healthy and smiley and very mutually sympathetic. I was in awe that God had given me those two children so easily and unexpectedly. Neither one of them were necessarily planned. We just enjoyed the perks of being married, and whenever I tested each time, that happened to be positive. So I was simultaneously thankful for them, and it was a gratitude that was so deep. It was as deep as the pain of having lost this third one. And it was at the same time, so you can imagine how interesting that display of emotion was. So I collected my things. I was given an instruction list of how to care for myself and what to look for in the following days or weeks that would happen in a natural miscarriage. The following day, I had told all the family and the close friends that I had told initially. Each time I recounted it, I usually cried. And a few of my other friends and family had posted on Facebook shortly after about their very successful ultrasounds and the heartbeats, and some of them shared videos and others just shared photos, and I remember a twinge of jealousy and a difficulty being happy for them. I was happy for them, of course, but it was difficult not being jealous and confused at why God had taken my little third one home before I got to meet him or her. And then my husband said something to me that really helped and kind of stuck with me each time I would get sad over it, and it would help give me comfort. He said that the little baby had never known anything besides complete comfort and satisfaction and love. He had the best that the world has to offer because he was always, or she was always, inside with immediate nourishment and immediate feelings of love and warmth. The baby never had to experience crying or hunger or anything else. God placed him or her with me for a very short time, allowed me the joy and the elation of a positive pregnancy test, and then, before anything possibly negative could have happened to him or her, God took her home. And that really stuck with me. And it brings me comfort whenever I start to miss whatever person the baby would have been. I still haven't quite become angry with God. I've been through enough other death in my life to understand that as a Christian, this world is temporary. It's going to eventually pass away, and one day all the people that he's taken home, that he's ended their life here on this earth, they're all going to be in heaven waiting, probably not even thinking about us currently because of all the joy that heaven is. But one day we're going to meet them again, and we're going to be able to have whatever type of relationship God has planned for heaven. And as a Christian, that is the foremost reminder and reality, is that this life is temporary. So we enjoy the loved ones that we have while we have them here. We share God's love and the truth of the gospel as Christians, and He alone is in charge of when and where each of our lives comes to an end. He gives and He takes away. So as Job recounted in the Bible, as he lost everything, and then in his case God gave it to him back tenfold. That doesn't always happen here, but we still bless His name because He's still good, and He's still God, and He's still sovereign. The fourth question recounts asking about my pro-life values and my comfort during grieving, so I suppose I already responded to the comfort part. With the pro-life values, I completely believe that from conception, God provides and He gives, the giver of life. We obviously have, the sperm and the egg, and we provide those, but even those God creates when He forms us. It's interesting studying the biology of the human body, and the reproductive system, and realizing how amazing God's design is, which Rebecca has covered in many of her previous videos, so I won't go into that. But God really provides everything that we need for life and for our existence from the very start. And it's really amazing to study all of that. I encourage you, whoever you are, wherever you are, in whatever stage of life you're in, to bring your questions before God. Challenge Him on it. He created you, and He can handle whatever issues or anger or sadness that you have towards Him or towards anyone else, because He created you and He has a purpose for you. The number 5 question is offering encouragement to both abortive and post-miscarriage women. This fifth one actually is something God's grown me on a lot in the last many years. I used to have a lot of anger and hatred towards women who would have an abortion. Experiencing the financial insecurity that I have in the last few months, or really the last year, God's really given me an empathy and a compassion for people who choose to end their child's life, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's a very scary thing to not know what your life holds next, not necessarily where the next meal is coming from. I've never been in that specific position, but I've worked a lot with homeless people, and I've worked a lot with women who are not certain where their support is coming from. And even in my very brief exposure to what it's potentially like, not knowing, the thought of possibly, more in the extreme condition of possibly not knowing if the roof over your head's going to be stable, or if you're going to have a vehicle to drive, if you're going to have meals to eat or to feed your children. It's scary. It's hard. It is 100% something that I hope God never has me actually live. And the people that are in that situation, the women, young or old, that face that, usually are also facing educational uncertainties. Sometimes they're in abusive relationships. I am very blessed with an amazing, supportive husband that cares for the family well. He's godly. He's a good leader. But I have been in very scary relationship situations, and had I had a child in those events, with my faith, I would have reached out with my pro-life values, but had I not, I would not be in those same positions. God's really shown me that it's not my place to judge what someone else is going through. It's my place to meet them where they are, show them love and support, and help them get to the resources that they need to fulfill the pro-life agenda, the pro-life values, to show them that they can. And if you're a mom, or you have been a mom, and you've lost a child, if God's taken that child home, or even if you've birthed a child and something's happened and you've had to say goodbye to that child that you got to know a little bit, that you imagined a future for, I'm so sorry. That's a hurt and a pain that no parent should have to experience. But I promise you that God is next to you, and He does care about you, and He does have a purpose for your pain, and He does love you. And even if you have had an abortion, you've had to make that choice. You didn't have support, or maybe you're watching and you volitionally decided to end the life of your child for whatever reason. That is something that you alone will have to live with and deal with and confront God about one day. And one of the predominant voices in the pro-life movement, Abby Johnson, has some experience with that same situation. And if you have any questions or concerns, or you've been through that, she's a great person to reach out to for those discussions. But know that either way, any person that calls themselves a Christian should still be willing to come next to you and to give you a hug and to say, you know what, it's okay, because Jesus redeems all things. And He doesn't do it on our timeline or our timetable, because He is sovereign and He is holy and He is merciful and gracious. He does it on His timetable, and He doesn't do it because we deserve it. And He doesn't do it with any help from us. For those of you that have experienced miscarriages, unfortunately, I now have some understanding of what you've gone through, and again, I'm sorry that you never got to meet your child. I'm sorry if you got to see your child on the screen wave at you or hear that heartbeat, and then all of a sudden you didn't. That's a grief and a mourning process that will probably be ongoing in various forms. Even if you have had children before, or you have children after, that child is never not going to have existed. They'll always have existed. And they are always worth remembering and talking about and sharing the life of, however brief that life was. They are always valuable and significant. I was encouraged to name my child. I still haven't come up with one. I still sometimes expect to be pregnant. Like, I look down and I'm confused at why I'm not larger, or why I haven't been to ultrasounds, or I expect that at some point in July or August, which was my original due date, that I will have had that child. We still hope for a rainbow baby, as they're called. I don't know where the term originated from, but I've heard a few people refer to them as rainbow babies. We hope that God provides one for us, and I hope that you have been gifted one, but know that that child never will replace the one that you lost, that you didn't get to meet in person. And it's okay. That child God often has purposes that we don't see. We expect life to last a certain amount of time. We have certain expectations. You know, when you get pregnant, you have the baby, and the baby lives to be an adult, and they live a long, happy life. And the reality is that God never assures us of that fact. He has a plan and a purpose for each child, but that purpose and that plan are usually not ones that we would expect them to be. And sometimes He purposes for us not to get to meet that child in person. He purposes different things. And for me, I'm at peace with that, but I realize that could be a very hard concept to grapple with for a lot of you out there, especially who don't come from my background of faith and belief in Christ. And that's also okay. Again, God can handle all of your anger and your sorrow and your questions and your hurt. And He can handle them with wide open arms, usually through the method of, someone else being a comfort to you in person, being a vessel for Him. And I suppose that brings me to the last question. My favorite comfort or scripture, and I can't specifically name one comfort, but as I've been studying the Old Testament through the last year and a half, the character trait of God being holy and sovereign has brought me tremendous comfort, because no matter what I face in this life, no matter how many loved ones He decides to take home before I think that their time has come, or what difficulties we face, He is not surprised. He is not confused. He is not taken aback. He's not sitting in some chair in the corner baffling and just scratching his eyebrow going, oh darn, what now? How in the world are we going to come back from this? No. He is mighty. And He is merciful. And every good thing comes from Him, even if we can't see its goodness. And knowing that He is sovereign and He is holy gives me comfort that He still has a plan and a purpose that I don't understand, and my only job is to trust and to follow Him as the shepherd. And again, as a Christian, that brings me comfort, because it's not up to me. It's not in my control. My focus every day is to develop my relationship with Him and observe as the Holy Spirit molds me into a more Christ-like vessel for Him on this earth until He calls me home. So for now, and for, I suspect, the duration of life, I will focus on developing that relationship and prioritizing Jesus as the center. And hopefully I get my rainbow baby, my fourth child, I suppose it would be. And if that doesn't happen, it's still okay. If He never provides another child, that's still okay, and He's still good. If He were to take either of my 2 kids and decide that their life on this earth was substantially shorter and different than I foresaw it being, he would still be a good God, and he would still be holy and sovereign, and my children would still be in his loving arms, where everyone that's Christian wants to be, which is eternally with him in his presence. If you have made it to the end of this and you have any questions or you want to talk, that's kind of my specialty. Is Rebecca is very good at being the activist and going to all the rallies and creating the content. My strong point is being a listening ear over a cup of coffee in whatever format that takes. And no matter what it is that you want to talk about, I'm happy to be a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, a human journal to vent to, whatever it is that you need or want. Feel free to reach out to me, whoever you are, whatever stage of life you're in, whatever you've gone through or are going through, even if it has nothing to do with abortion or miscarriages or any of that other stuff. God's given me a gift of empathy, and I think that in spite of my dislike of sobbing in front of total strangers, as I have just done for the last 30 minutes, or longer, however long this has taken, God created emotions, he created the heart, he created connection, and he has chosen to use humans as his vessels to connect other humans to himself most of the time. So it is not my place to determine that I don't like the gift I've been given. It is my place to utilize the gift to his glory and honor. And that is what I will do. So thank you for watching, and I hope this has been help and a blessing to you. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Just like my sister said, if you need any help, please reach out. Her specialty is Facebook, and you can find me on basically all of the main social media platforms, information somewhere on the screen. There's going to be no judgment, only love and support to get you from where you are to where you need to be. And now for this week's book recommendation. It is titled Empty Arms for Those Who Suffered a Miscarriage, Stillbirth, or Tubal Pregnancy. It is a book by Pam Vredevlet, I think is how you pronounce her name. She's both a licensed professional counselor, and she's also someone who has suffered not only a miscarriage, but also the loss of a 16-year-old son. It is a book filled with excellent and sage advice, and of course you can find it in all of the usual spots. And now, as promised, if you or someone you know has been through a miscarriage, there's a few excellent resources to check out. naturalfertilityinfo.com, the Miscarriage Association, and then literally any pro-life clinic near you. Pro-life clinics are actually designed to help with every single stage of the process, including a miscarriage. And it's not just for the women, it's also for the men involved in this. You're not alone, and you are so loved through every step. And P.S. side note on this, if you are the guy in this scenario and you lost your child, my extraordinary condolences to you. My own father happens to be in the mix, and I can't even imagine the strength that takes. So good on you. Now, as to what we're going to be talking about next week. We are going to be looking at why pro-choice and Christianity cannot be reconciled to one another. Now, another quick side note before we end, if you aren't subscribed to this channel yet, it would be awesome if you would do so. It actually really, really does help. And for now, remember how precious and loved and cherished you are by our Creator. And I challenge you to live your life as though it is true, because I promise you that it will revolutionize your world. And until next time, let's continue to be pioneers in the space between the picket lines together. God bless. I'll see you next week.